It's time for the DPS tier list of mid-season 10, and just based off of the individual hero changes, it's not the biggest mid-season patch we've seen, but because of the armor changes, things have totally changed, and not just for tanks. A lot of DPS have been affected, because the armor isn't exactly better or worse, it's just different. Now that it's more resistant to small amounts of damage, our damage dealer tier list has been switched up a lot. Today's Overwatch video is made possible because of Raid, and before you go judging me, make sure to actually try it. It's a turn-based fighting game with over 800 heroes, and the big kicker is, you'll get $100 in rewards with the game leap link in the description. It's completely free and it works on PC and all mobile devices. You can go ahead and click the link right now to claim your $100 in rewards. It helps us keep going and it's a fun casual game. Sign up to give it a try right now. We've already got Reaper down to F tier because of the new armor. Reaper is already one of the least consistent heroes in the game. There isn't much he can do besides commit. He can't spam effectively at all, and when he flanks, he has to go the full distance. Unlike Tracer or Genji, who can hold space instead. He really can only do two things: teleport on backline to pressure them, or focus the tank, and right now it is not the patch to be focusing a tank unless you got at least 17 damage bullets. And Reaper's shotgun pellets are each just 5.4 damage. He now has to deal with the full 50% damage reduction of armor, so unless you're playing against Roadhog, an equally bad hero, half of your damage will be trying to break armor, and the other half just won't be enough to pressure the kill. Reaper can only deal around 800 damage with each reload without headshots, so now that armor soaks way more of his damage, it's back to teleporting on backline again. Flanking with Reaper is great as an alternative, but not as a forced playstyle because tanks are tanking you harder. Reaper is the only drastically worse hero in this list, as we're moving up to C tier already. Next is Bastion, who's technically not that bad. He even has 100 armor to work with, which makes tanks worse at killing him, and he's also good at killing tanks. He is affected by armor in his turret form though. It's not the full 50%, but he still deals 210 DPS instead of his normal 360. He's definitely worse at killing tanks this patch. Aside from that, Echo, Junkrat, and Hanzo buffs are pretty bad for him too. Bastion is pretty weak into projectile spam, and he's already a pretty comp-dependent hero that needs a lot of care. Even though he has a lot of potential with super high skill rush comps, they're just not viable and ranked at all. Next in C tier is another super high skill rush hero, Symmetra. She's dropped from the bottom of B tier as high range spam becomes stronger and more tanks are becoming viable. She's not any better this patch, but her teleporter is still really strong. Getting your team to use it is the hard part though. At 300 total health, it's hard to take down, and a 5-man team teleport rush is actually really difficult to handle. Outside of that very specific plan that doesn't work all the time though, Sim just doesn't do enough. Her damage has been okay for a while now, but she's too complicated to execute with, and easily outpaced. Moving up to B tier, which is completely stacked, we've got Junkrat. He actually got a decent upgrade this patch. With his primary fire damage increased by 5, he can 2-tap most heroes again. Hitting both shots after Season 9 isn't too hard either, so in close range, he's a lot better. Hitting 2 directs on the same target cross-map isn't reliable, but it's gonna start happening on maps where Junk has good, safe spam angles. This patch also made him better at spamming tanks. The 5 extra damage he got even tanks that armor reduction for him, so he's dealing 120 total against armor every time. But he really is barely holding onto B tier. He's still very limited by the map he's on, and by the enemy heroes too. Just because Junk deals more damage overall doesn't make it easier to contest the more consistent heroes in the game, but being B tier for the first time in a long time is pretty good. Next up is Sombra. She's in a weird spot this patch. Thanks to armor, she loses damage against tanks, but ever since her virus rework, she's been better at bursting squishy targets instead. She's pretty difficult to play sometimes, but her hack engage is good enough to keep her in B tier. It won't work against all comps, but the ability to force a one-shot is really valuable. You won't be getting free picks all the time, but you will be burning enemy resources like crazy. Sombra's disruption is unmatched in the DPS category. She may not force tanks out with damage, but even the normal hack silence duration is enough to mess up any hero's tempo, giving your team a decent advantage in the fight. But she does struggle dealing with all the other heroes besides tanks with armor, like the next hero, Torbjorn. With flankers nerfed just enough, Torb can take back his role as the dive counter. He's totally fine into armor with his primary fire spam, and his own armor combined with his overload make him a lot more resilient than before. Just his single chunk of 50 armor is so good against tanks. It's basically 50 extra HP against half the tank roster. Maybe he's not instantly the best new option with heroes like Tracer and Sombra being worse overall, but he's way better in comparison. And that's just like Pharah halfway through B tier. Her rockets are devastating now. Just like Junkrat, she gets a minimal amount of damage reduced by armor, and her mobility rework allows her to consistently spam from closer ranges. Going aggressive for the commit is still dangerous, but there are a lot of supports that are good at pocketing Pharah, Mercy obviously being one of them. Her tempo is still pretty slow, but as long as you don't get completely shut down by enemy hit scans, you can get a lot done. And there are definitely a good number of maps with cover to make that matchup easier. Now for Widowmaker. Sharing the halfway spot with Pharah, she's pretty obviously better. One-shot headshots just have to be respected. If her falloff was any worse, she would definitely be in C tier, but as it stands, Widowmaker is one of the only heroes that can pull an advantage out of nowhere. The one-shot headshot is just that good. But here's the drawback. At only 200 HP, there are a lot of ways to kill Widowmaker and fast. Wrecking Ball is a lot better, and if he finds Widowmaker scoped in, she's pretty much dead. And of course, as the Widowmaker, you need to hit your shots. Season 9 did make it easier, but you not only have to hit your shots overall, but hitting your first shot on an angle is even more important. Widow has a lot of power over the angle she holds, but when she gets pinged and located, it gets a lot easier to handle her. Moving on to Mei. She's probably the least changed this patch. Widowmaker is all over the place with risk and reward, while Mei's Icicle deals more damage into armor now. That's about it. But still, as flankers have gotten weaker, Mei can more easily fit into rush comps. Her Ice Wall is one of the best ways to force a kill on the enemy tank. It's not the most viable strategy all the time, but the armor changes mostly make it harder for tanks to kill tanks. Combining Mei with any high damage spamming guy will always make for a good team comp. Her primary fire slow is even a good counter to all kinds of aggressive tanks. Closing in on the top of B tier, we finally got Venture. Despite their latest nerfs, their ability cycle and damage are both good enough to stay relevant this season. Venture definitely depends on rush engages to really shine, but they're still strong enough to make individual plays. You can just win most duels on flanks or off angles, and can even get picks on backline with the right burst engage. The only thing really holding them back is their low effective range. Some maps are really just impossible, but with Burrow available, there's always some way to engage. It's a short cast time for such a powerful survival ability that can also double as a 110 damage area burst. Second best in B tier goes to Soldier 76. He isn't that great into armor compared to the other long range spammers. His primary fire gets reduced by 27%, but that is slightly better than the previous patch. And Soldier can just use his Helix Rocket to break armor like in Overwatch 1. Soldier will always be really reliable with 171 DPS, but he's just so easy to dive. Wrecking Ball Slam, Winston Bubble, even an aggressive Doomfist engage can be enough to kill him outright. Having his heal station at 18 seconds is also still really rough. You can really only use it once per fight. Soldier may not be as good as he used to be, but his damage is consistent and reliable, and he can flank really effectively. If you're not against invincible front lines or super dives, you can carry pretty hard with decent tracking and target focus. Now for the top of B tier, it's Hanzo. His buff this patch was pretty minor. In some cases, Dragon Strike is better for getting quick surprise kills, but in others, the dragons don't stick around for long enough. Either way, the ultimate is still roughly the same, but his damage is a lot better thanks to the new armor change. Now that spamming tanks is even better, Hanzo has a lot more value in between storm arrows, and he even got those recently buffed too. But although they're really good for winning spam duels, he just doesn't have enough mobility. He dies easily into dive comps and can't really take space fast on off angles. His base kit is solid and way better now into armor, but he's still missing that top level movement that sets the A tier and S tier above the rest. Now that we're finally done with B tier, it's Genji up next. He's also better into armor and fits well into the upcoming meta. He can feel pretty bad into Moira Brig, but outside of the weirdest Genji-focused enemy comps you've ever seen, he has really good coverage. When not against every beam hero combined into one team, dashing in to force a kill is almost a zero-risk play. One of the best things about Genji is that not only does he engage, but he has deflect to keep himself in the engage. That extended cycle makes it really easy for your tank and supports to help you out, especially considering the latest Junker Queen buffs. Genji's sticking around in A tier this season, but he's definitely the most counterable out of the remaining heroes, even compared to the next and already best in A tier, Ashe. She dominates the long-range spam game, although her head hitbox is dangerously big. Counter-sniping her is a very real problem, but the good thing for her is that the armor changes are switching up the meta and viable heroes a lot. And with the DPS passive back at 20% healing reduction, Dynamite is even more devastating, and Kiriko is a must-pick to counter her. Every other matchup is that much better for Ashe, especially stacked teams trying to rush in with Malga Queen or Rein Brawl. She's not overpowered enough to be an S tier, but she's got a decent kit with one of the best AoE abilities in the game, and for now that's enough. Now finally for S tier, still with 4 heroes, but the armor changes have switched things around pretty massively. For starters, Tracer is first up. She got her nerfs and all, but they only made her more balanced, not less strong. The armor revert has really hit her hard though. Not hard enough to knock her out of the meta, but her damage into tanks is halved all the time. She's not specifically a tank killer, so it's not the biggest deal, and her pulse bomb is actually better into tanks now. It's gone from 30% damage reduction to less than 2%, so that's definitely going to help a lot. Tracer still has amazing damage and all the abilities to carry games hard. It's just that now she's not the most ideal hero for every matchup, which is totally a good thing. Next we've got Echo. She's up one spot above Tracer, mostly thanks to the armor changes as expected, but her ultimate got buffed in a decent way too. With a faster charging duplicate ultimate, her diving gauge can reach even higher peaks, and her pre-fight spam is straight up the best in the game. Her sticky bombs alone set up so many potential kills and ability forces, and even her normal projectile spam is consistent even across super long ranges. Tanks reducing headshot damage doesn't matter much either when you have your focusing beam to nail them with. Echo was already a solid hero, and armor hasn't affected her much at all. Her primary fire damage is exactly 17 damage per shot, so 5 damage reduced is just 30%, just like previous patch. Her beam is also the same, but you should literally never be using your beam on armor anyway. Although Echo has a decently sized hitbox, she's a solid S tier hero through and through. But the top 2 heroes are the safest, reliable picks, with insane coverage on pretty much every map. First is Sojourn, and she does not care about armor. Even though her bullets deal half damage, they're all about charging up your rail, and when you're dueling anyone else, they won't have any armor to reduce that damage buildup. Sojourn is still the best, most consistent long-range damage hero. She's the envy of everyone else because of how good her railgun and slide are. Those 2 abilities pretty much make up Sojourn's consistent high-level performance. She can deal high burst damage from any range and flip from one side of the map to another in an instant. Her slide is just so fast. And to finish it off, her ultimate is as insane as always. It's really hard to beat, even for the next and best DPS overall. And that spot goes to Cassidy. Deadeye is nothing flashy, but it gets the zoning and space taking done. It's his normal damage neutral that makes him the best overall though. Being able to 2-tap within 25 meters is amazing, and it's just long enough that he can work on every map. Sojourn still beats him when it gets unreasonably far, but with 275 HP and a 75% damage reduction roll, closing the distance isn't hard. Cass has become really strong since the Season 9 changes, and now he's overtaken Sojourn as the better default pick. He just wins against her in so many situations despite being less mobile. And where Sojourn has her Disruptor Shot, Cassidy has his Hindering Grenade. It took a while for it to really become annoyingly effective, and now it pretty much single-handedly covers the flanker matchup for your team. Cass is in a great state, but the meta is pretty volatile still. Until things get really solidified, you can't go wrong with Cassidy's consistency. That's it for the DPS tier list for mid-season 10. You can go ahead and click the link right now to claim your $100 in rewards. It helps us keep going, and it's a fun casual game. Sign up to give it a try right now.